Again, welcome back. Um, in the last lecture, which was really my first introductory lecture for the course itself, I mentioned that the course is a highly interdisciplinary kind of a course itself, given both the temporal range of it, going from something like 5,000 years ago till about 600 years ago, something like that. We'll see, and we'll try and get as much of that covered as we can, but understand with so much of a range, it's really hard to get a handle on it. Yet, on the other hand, the text does provide you with a number of um, temporal timelines to really get a sense of how extremely focused the human experience is in terms of everything else. So let's just start briefly there, right? Um, the uh, the universe, as we understand it, the extreme spread of stars throughout galaxies throughout this immense space around us, seems to have a beginning point somewhere in the range of 13.8, 13.9 billion years ago, at an event that was called the Big Bang. And so we have the Big Bang theory that suggests that um, all matter in the universe today was created out of an initial explosion um, billions of years ago, almost 14 billion years ago, that spread matter all out into the universe. It continues to spread it because the universe is still spreading and expanding, right? So that's the beginning of everything. The Milky Way, our galaxy, and it's a constellation of millions and millions, if not billions, of stars itself. The Milky Way has a lifespan of maybe began about 13.5 billion years ago. And of course, if it began that long ago, it has continued to evolve and create spin off systems of planets, and new suns appeared, old suns have burned out, and a whole lot of stuff that I really don't know that much about. I would not claim any expertise at all. The next point along the way is the creation of the sun, which is our star at the center of the solar system. And the sun and the solar system more or less come into existence about the same time, so that the solar system has is dated as being 4.57 billion years old. The solar no, the sun is 4.6 billion years ago. The solar system is 4.57 billion years ago. The Earth itself, then, is 4.5 billion years ago. It's going to take the Earth a while to be able to sort of move out of this first sort of molten stage to develop oceans. And so about 3.5 billion years ago, perhaps a bit more. And again, each time we get a new finding of when the earliest form of something comes about. Well, in this case, the first life forms on this planet, which are indicated in fossilized forms of rock that date back to 3.5 billion years ago, if not later, 4 billion years. So life appears on the planet in a most primitive, minute, microscopic form, and will begin the process of growth and emergence 4 billion years ago. Now, one point I want to say about this, and really this is certainly not a course about either, the solar system, the universe, or any of that kind of stuff. Take a course in physics with someone who understands this stuff better than me. But one thing I do find kind of interesting is when you read the scientists talking about this process of growth and evolution, right from the start, the emergence of life forms in the primeval oceans will actually begin to change the atmosphere itself, which was noxious to life, before life itself began to appear in the oceans and released oxygen into the atmosphere. I say this is interesting because we are in the process of debating humanity's impact on the environment. And when you look at this from a really long point of view, you say, wow, life forms virtually from the start in interacting with the environment for their own survival have indeed impacted the environment itself, and have created a world that is our world today, which we are now changing and hopefully not making it unlivable for future generations, right? Okay, so you get that long picture, this long stretch of time. Well, if life emerged 4 billion years ago, it takes it a while to evolve into creatures that can crawl out of the sea, come onto land, and they go through all sorts of iterations. So you have to go all the way up to something like maybe 23 million years ago. And so we've gone from billions of years to millions of years, right? So we see that, the framework starts like this, and now it's focused down. And what would seem to us an immensely long period of time, millions of years, is actually a minute part of this much larger spectrum of the growth of the universe and even the life of the planet itself, the solar system. So 23 million years ago, the form of animal that students of human evolution see as sort of the starting point of this is something closely akin to contemporary lemurs. And lemurs are kind of small, cute, furry little animals with finger-like kinds of hands that climb up on trees, eat fruit, and this kind of a thing. And they are seen as sort of like the earliest emergence of the line that eventually will lead into the growth of primates, and with that, all of our arboreal ancestors, such that 11 million years ago, um, gorillas, the line that leads to contemporary gorillas, and these were animals that were somehow similar to gorillas, but a larger family of animals then subdivided into two streams. One stream will lead to contemporary gorillas. A second stream will lead to to humans and chimpanzees. Before I go any further, let me just explain that biologists have looked at the chimpanzee, particularly the bonobo chimpanzee or midget chimpanzee, and have, with contemporary scientific equipment, been able to establish that the DNA of the bonobo chimpanzee is close to 98.5% equivalent to human DNA, which is to say that the chimpanzee biologically is our closest living animal relative in the animal realm itself. Humans, well, not humans, but hominids and the ancestors of chimpanzees will also subdivide something like 6 million years ago, which seems to be an immense amount of time. But now we're looking at it to see how it's really focusing down, right? And so somewhere around that point in time, we begin to move in the direction of hominids who will be increasingly the direct ancestors of modern Homo sapiens. And the book gives you Lucy and a couple of other the famous finds, skeletal finds that show the sort of the proliferation of divergent forms of the human skull, the mandible, the teeth, the length of the arms, the legs, the body form. But the first thing we want to start with then is bipedal locomotion. Now, these are biological traits that humans have that have their roots in their arboreal ancestors, their tree-dwelling ancestors. The first thing we want to look at is the human hand, but we actually have to look at the whole arm. Usually we start by talking about um, opposable thumbs. What's so big about an opposable thumb? Well, I get thirsty and my hand, which is composed of 5 digits, 3 digits have got sockets. 4 of the 5 digits are 3 socketed digits. Okay, the thumb has only got 1. Okay, 2. These have got 3. This enables us to grasp and hold objects. Why would that be important to our tree-dwelling ancestors? Well, primarily to enable them to reach out and grab a banana, an apple, a piece of fruit from a tree, hold it, peel it, eat it, throw it away, right? That's one thing. They were able to use their hands to grab the different items of food that they ate. But remember, they're tree dwelling. And one of the things they have to do is jump from branch to branch. Now, stop for a second and think, why are they up in the trees? Primarily for protection. There are predators. For the most part, at the point of time that we're talking about, the major predators to our hominid ancestors were big cats. And indeed, amongst the finds that we have are skulls that have the marks of the teeth of the cat that has grabbed this individual and dragged him back to the den where the kittens, the cute little kittens, will rip apart the body and eat it and this kind of a thing. So the text does make the point that our early hominid ancestors were less the hunters than the hunted. Their size was smaller than we are today. And so all of those primates that still live in the trees today have still got to be aware of predators that can grab them and kill them and eat them and this kind of a thing. And so our ancestors were arboreal. They were tree dwelling. They used the opposable thumb. But remember, let me see, it's hard for me. I'm not so good with, so you also have this, you can do this, you have this, and you also have a ball and socket joint in your shoulder, which gives the human arm so much movement and flexibility, right? In terms of its ability to manipulate, grasp, hold things, move them around, look at them from different sides. All of those kinds of things are something that comes to us from our arboreal ancestors, right? Opposable thumbs and the different sockets that we have on the arm all the way up to the shoulder give us sort of a unique flexibility. That's important, right? And we'll come to that importance in a second. The second thing that we have is stereoscopic vision, which is the ability to see at a distance and distinguish distance. If we only had one eye, we could probably still see things, but we would see things as a flat world, not able to determine what's far and what's close and things like that. Now, why would that be important to our ancestors? Well, when you leap from branch to branch, right, unless you're able to determine the distance of that branch, you know what's going to happen. You're going to miss, fall on your face, and soon be eaten, right? And given the laws of evolution, any of the members of the group that have defective vision will eventually select for destruction, will not pass on their genetic material, and increasingly good vision, stereoscopic vision, will be selected for as critical aspect of it, right? Let me see. Let me look at my notes for a second. Okay, one thing I certainly forgot that's critical, which is bipedal locomotion. Bipedal means standing on 2 feet is what it means. Being able to stand up straight um, and and walk and move. If you've ever been to a zoo and watched a gorilla on the ground, these are truly immense animals. You know, the physical size, the shoulders, the arm muscles, right? Their legs are massive too. But when they walk on the ground, they have great difficulty. They do what anthropologists refer to as knuckle walking. So they use their front extremities as both hands and feet. It makes for very, very inefficient transportation on the ground. And so they are still effectively arboreal creatures designed to live in trees. You know, and if you've ever seen them in the context where they can, struggle around on the ground, moving from place to place, and then suddenly jump in a tree and go right up the tree in no time at all and hang from a branch by one arm, and they weigh, 1,500, 2,000 pounds, you recognize the fact that they're much more comfortable in that niche, that environmental niche, than they are on the ground, right? What would lead our arboreal ancestors to, first of all, stand up straight and come down from the trees? There is some debate about this, and I'm not going to come in on one side or the other. One of the things, though, that has been sort of brought to bear in this debate is the changing environment in parts of Africa where our hominid ancestors first evolved and first emerged. And as the environment changed, they are tree dwelling animals. But once the climate begins to dry out, the number of clusters of trees forming forests, as a continuous whole of trees, which will enable these animals to sort of move across and harvest fruits from different trees here and there. Once that begins to dry out and you have isolated clusters, well, a pack of animals can exhaust the food there, and be forced to come down from the tree. And having looked around and seen another cluster of trees over there that looks like it has something for them to eat. But of course, once they come down from the trees, the reason why they were up in the trees to begin with begins to confront them, right? On the ground, then, they are now vulnerable to those predators that are faster than they are. But of course, what's going to happen is those animals that stand up straight on two legs will actually move faster and can travel further than other related animals that have not made the transition to standing up straight. Now, there are anthropologists out there, physical anthropologists, students of animals themselves, right? Who say, well, wait a second, there are in the trees animals that stand up straight to take a fruit from up there, right? So they're saying, well, it may not have been such a big change. It may be just jumping down from the tree and running out. In any case, hold on to that idea that there are countervailing theories out there, ways of looking at this whole issue, and consider for a second how one group of students of human evolution have taken this idea of evolving into bipedal locomotion and see it as a critical element in the emergence of contemporary humanity. And let me explain for a second. What they see happening, and again, this is not just speculation, this is, shall we say, informed speculation based on the analysis of those admitted rather limited specimens, but the specimens that we have that suggest that there was a process of evolution inside the framework of the hominid body over time that leads to not just upright mobility, but changes the human structure, and that then has an impact on us. What do I mean? If you've ever looked at a gorilla, sitting there in a zoo, indifferent to you, its back to you, and you look at it, its legs sort of come down like that. Um, they're sort of bent, so I can't look at it because I see it backwards and it comes out backwards. But um, they have huge hips, right? They have huge hips and huge legs, but they are sort of structured in such a fashion that they are bent over like this, right? So here's his head up here, right? Here's the back comes down like this, and it joins here like this to the legs, and so that the pelvis bone it has a form like this, straight down like this, and then bent around and connects up with the leg structure of the bottom half of the body, so that the pelvis is actually curved like this. Once you achieve bipedal locomotion, the pelvis itself has changed to reflect the upright stance of those creatures. What this means is the birth canal of females is reduced. Okay. The pelvis has been restricted. It is now changed in shape. And so the period of time in which the mother carries the fetus during pregnancy is reduced to respond to the physical change in the structure of the animal. Now, why would that be important? Well, what these people say is look at the contemporary human neonate, the newborn infant. Their fontanelles are not closed yet. Can't do that to an infant, a human infant. You would literally, if you put your thumb on their head, you could stick your head down into their brain and kill them. And so what they are saying is, at a certain point in time, hominids began to evolve in the direction of having infants that are increasingly more dependent on their parents for their survival. But more importantly than that, which is relatively obvious to us today, we understand that human infants are completely dependent on caretakers. What they say is really critical here is this is the triggering mechanism for the shift from instinct to learning. Now, what anthropologists will say is, I know we use the word instinct rather casually and easily, as it were, but for the anthropologist, the term instinct really only refers to complex systems of behavior that individual members of specific species know how to do, not because they've learned how to do it, but because they are born into a group that practices this and they inherit it as part of their sort of genetic structure. So what do we mean by this? Okay, I like this example, right? If you can believe it. I mean, people out there, when they throw these ideas around, they say, well, how can we test it, right? One of the tests they did was they took spiders. And they said, okay, spiders. Spiders make incredible structures. Spider web is just an amazing act of, structural acuity, right? If you've ever been out in a forest in the morning and you see a spider web, stretching from branch to branch, with little drops of dew on it as the sun rises, sparkling like diamonds, right? And then you see the circular structures of it, and you're, wow, that's amazing, right? And I say to myself, I'd probably have to go to FIT for about 10 years, and then maybe I'd be able to make a reasonable spider's web, right? Is that instinct or learning? So what they did was they took spider eggs and raised them apart from any potential contact with other adult spiders and watched to see to what extent individual spiders raised in a sort of a pristine environment with no contact with other spiders would grow up and as adults weave spider webs. And indeed they did, right? And so they expected that to happen, but what they are trying to demonstrate is it's not a question of a baby spider observing what an adult spider does and said, hey, I can try that. I can do that same thing too, right? And they have a gland that secretes the liquid that makes it and all this kind of a thing. So it does seem pretty straightforward. Yet the point is that's what the word instinct should refer to in the biological sciences, right? A complex system of behavior that has no learning component in it, but that emerges spontaneously. And you look at a lot of the animals out there, right? I've seen, a film showing a colt, a baby horse being born, right? Comes out from the mother's, whatever, emerges from the mother. The mother licks off the afterbirth. The young colt sort of looks around, stretches, and goes, damn, I'm a horse. The next thing you know is bouncing around and seems to know how to do everything a horse can do. Jumps, cajole, this kind of a thing. Knows it has to come up and suck the mother for milk and things like that. Well, that's in effect, it is born programmed to know what its role is, if what its behavior should be, what it should be to do a member of that species. Think of an animal like a beaver that creates this incredible structure, a dam, right? Again, the same kind of a thing. Baby beavers were taken away from a mother, given bottle trained and things like that, and then put in natural settings again, and they built dams the same way, right? And so, but again, all of these behaviors have to be tested to see whether they are instinct or not. Think of cats cleaning themselves. You go, is that instinct? Well, it turns out it's not. It turns out that unless the mother does that to the kittens will not grow up licking themselves as other cats do. And so that is learned behavior. So indeed, as we have refined the definitions and looked at different experiments, we've gone out into different areas to do this. Humans, what do we have? And that's what we're really concerned about here. Do we have any instincts of that sort or another? The closest thing I think we have that would qualify as an instinct is our language behavior. But what biologists will say is, well, wait a second. Unless a human infant is in contact with members of a speech community who speak to the child will not learn how to speak. And there have been specific examples of this, of children who, for one reason or another, did not grow up speaking and did not have the capacity to speak. When they were discovered at the age of 6, 8, 10 years old, they were virtually mute. They'd make sounds almost like animals and this kind of a thing. And researchers would take them and were ultimately able to teach them some very, very minimal language behavior, right? And so what we say there is, it's not that we have an instinct for language, we have a predisposition, a biological predisposition to learn language when we are placed in that environment. What's critical here is the idea that indeed, um, virtually all of human behavior is learned behavior. And certainly psychologists and others working with, observing the behavior of um, young children and things like that, are trying to test how far we can take this hypothesis. But what the anthropologists are trying to show is the possible causal relationship between coming down from the trees, standing upright to survive, and in the process, right, natural selection will increasingly choose those people who stand up more facilely, easily, can use them more quickly, right? Now, once you do that, then, okay, um, if indeed it begins to feed into this hypothesis that the gestation period for the human fetus is reduced, um, infants are born neurologically incomplete, hence learning replaces instinct. It is both a debility, a weakness, and our point of greatest strength, right? Because we are born defenseless, right? But we now have um, the capacity and need to learn. And so, a number of things come together to suggest that, unlike other animals, humans form families that are a necessary element in the growth and development of human communities and societies over time, particularly given both the physical incapacities of the human infant tied together with the fact that we are born, as John Locke said, as tabula rasa. And his expression, tabula rasa, was a blank slate, referring to the slates that children took to school with them, and where they would write information on, take it home, memorize it, clean it off when they came back in again, but that the human infant is born with um, a, an empty, shall we say, knowledge locker that gets filled over time. Now, look, John Locke was also a very bright individual who suggested that the ability to think, even though it's tied to learning from external examples and things like that, inside the human head, reflection and thought and consideration can lead to the growth and development of knowledge, apart from any direct experience of the outside world, other than reflection inside the human brain itself. They would talk about Socrates, a person that is the very model of the thinker, right? That he would literally go and sit down for 24 hours like this and think, right? Okay, so what do we have so far? So we have bipedal locomotion, we have opposable thumbs, we also have a fire going on here where I am, something like that. That's the fire department. Okay, who knows, maybe it's an ambulance, right? In today's world, you never know what it is, right? Now, so these are traits that we carry with us out of our animal arboreal ancestors. The opposable thumb and the hand makes tool usage possible. And indeed, the expression, the Stone Age. And what that refers to, the fact that the first form of stones used were used by our hominid ancestors going back approximately 2.5, 2.6 million years ago, but that date can be pushed further back. But of course, the further back you go, the more difficult it is to determine that a rock actually is a tool and is not an isolated event where a rock falls off the side of a cliff and happens to be there, not because humans have, cut it or used it or this kind of a thing, right? So the further back you go in the past, the the greater the doubt is that what's being called a tool, in addition to being it linked together with a species that is part of the hominid ancestry of humans, all of these things. But the earliest tools, and indeed in my locker here, unless I gave it away because I gave some books away recently, but I do have, or maybe it's at the college, I've got a whole another mess of books there. A book specifically that, sort of has pictures and descriptions of stone axes from all over the world at different points in time, and you really get a chance to see rather closely. Now, tool usage is critical to human growth and development. As I said before, you put a 6 foot 8 inch, 350 pound muscle man with all kinds of skills into a cage with a lion, a tiger, a bear. And I'm going to put my money on those animals that have been gifted with nature with long claws, teeth, whatever it is that they can use to destroy you, right? So humans themselves, in our naked essence, are really defenseless out there in the wild, much in the same way that a monkey would be on a tree today. Its only defense is its ability to escape, right? To jump from branch to branch and move quickly through the trees. If a cat begins to climb the trees and trying to grab a monkey for dinner, we would be in the same situation, right? Now, of course, we have human intelligence, right? But human intelligence is going to be instantly looking for a tool to use to defend ourselves, right? And so it's the growth of tools and tool building that begins then, like I said, something like 2.5 million years ago, with the earliest forms of stone tools. Maybe our ancestors used them to crush nuts, whatever, whatever they used them for, right? And as I also mentioned, certainly going back 2.5 million years ago, we find a creature that is more hunted than hunter, right? And so that creature is definitely going to require tools to defend itself, but also to feed itself, right? Now, let me end by just mentioning the fact that if we are creatures who must learn, it is the growth of the human brain across time, as demonstrated in the fossilized skulls of ancestor species, which demonstrate the growth of the ability to think, reflect, and to know, as we suggested now, through learning, all of which will require speech. Now, most anthropologists will suggest that speech is probably coterminous in terms of going back into time with the earliest human communities per se, that humanity required speech to organize itself, right? And so speech in humans is a truly distinctive characteristic that separates us from other animals. Communication, the broader category, is found extremely broadly throughout nature. But humans have the capacity for what's called articulated speech. And articulated speech patterns flow out of the structure of the human face, the lips, the teeth, the tongue, the mouth cavity itself, and the fact that we resonate sound out of our vocal cords, right? But we as a species are able to articulate. which is to say, I can say round instead of rune. I can say round instead of bound. I can use that. And of course, when you go to learn a second language, one of the greatest challenges is being able to make sounds that are found in that language that may not be found in yours. Now, let me end this session by giving you an interesting example. Linguists have studied the speech behavior of human infants. They have recorded the babbling sounds, goo goo gaga, this kind of a thing, right? They have recorded hours of them and sat down with the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet, and actually translated those sounds into identifiable sounds within the framework of the IPA. What they've discovered is extraordinary. You listen to the babbling sounds of any baby, anywhere, and record it long enough, you will hear every known sound of every existing language on the planet, and we assume of any language that has ever existed. What does that mean? Remember what I said, we may not have instincts, but we may have predispositions. So genetically, we have inherited a predisposition to language, which is reflected in the fact that the human neonate, the newborn infant, is able to articulate virtually every sound of every language. Don't tell that to the kid in the 7th grade who's trying to learn French, and you have to go, something like that, right? Or Arabic, or Chinese, or Korean, whatever, right? Navajo. And you go, I can't do it. Well, you could do it. Because when you were newly born, your mouth was structured in a fashion that it could articulate every sound of every language, which reflects the universality of the human species in an interesting way. But it also says to me something kind of fascinating as well. So there I am as an infant learning the language of my native language, which has a restricted number of sounds, which are the critical sounds. Linguists call them phonemes. Okay, the distinctive sounds of that language that enable you to distinguish cat from bat, this kind of a thing. And as you learn those sounds, you progressively forget the corpus of universal sounds that was the gift of genetic inheritance at your birth. So that learning one language is to forget all other possibilities. And linguists and psychologists suggest somewhere between 12 and 14 years old, that capacity disappears. So if you walk into a language class in college for the first time and you are asked to make a sound in that language that's not in your own language, it's going to be tough. You're not going to be able to do it. I would go beyond that and say, not only can you not make that sound, I've had experiences as a language instructor that suggest you can't hear it. And certainly if you can't hear it, you can't make that sound, right? Because I have taught English to people in Iran and people in Saudi Arabia who would have terrible times making sounds that didn't exist in their own language, right? Okay, we're going to stop this here. We'll continue with this at a slightly later date. Thank you for your rapt attention. I'm sure this was wonderful for you as it was for me. All right.